Alright everybody, today I'm gonna show you how to Dockerize your MERN stack application and run each services in the same network connected to each other using Docker Compose tool. Alright, and this is an amazing tool. Like really, you gotta learn to use it right now and use it in your projects. Alright, so we're just gonna implement everything in that project, which is a simple to do application. So I'm just gonna clone this application to this server, which by the way I created a brand new droplet for this video, and we're just gonna do all these things in that server. So I'm just gonna say, like, first let's create a projects folder and get into it. I'm just gonna say git clone this string. Alright, we're just cloning it and let's get into it. Perfect. Now we have backend and frontend. So the first thing we need to do is creating Docker file for each service. Alright, this is the first step. Then we're just gonna create a YAML configuration file, and then we're just gonna spin up each container using Docker Compose. Alright, so let's go to backend first, and I'm just gonna create the Docker file to create the image, right? And instead of typing all this required stuff in this terminal interface, I'm just gonna open up my VS Code and write all these things here because it's easy to edit and it's auto control or auto typing basically in a way. And we're just gonna copy and paste it here. Nothing confusing. So the first thing here is the parent image. I'm just gonna use node 18, the Alpine, alright, and the work directory will be app, doesn't really matter what you call here. And then I'm just gonna say copy package JSON first to the current directory in that image. Then we're just gonna run the npm install command. Then we're just gonna copy all other codes inside of into the image. So the last thing is we're just gonna say cmd, which stands for command, and we're just gonna say npm lowercase npm start, which will start our node application. And that's it. I'm just gonna copy and paste it in this original Docker file. So let's save it and exit. Alright, the Docker file for backend service is ready. So let's get out of this directory and let's get into the front end. Perfect. Now let's create the new Docker file for this front end service as well. So I'm just gonna pretty much copy it, right? Like nothing different here. And of course we need to say expose, which by the way I forgot to put the expose part in the backend Docker file. Alright, we're just gonna do it now. So I will say export, and it will be expose in port 3000. Alright, this is for frontend React, and save and exit. That's it. So let's go back to the backend. Let's edit it, and I'm just gonna add this expose just right here. Okay, and it's going to be 5000 for the backend Node API. Alright, and that's pretty much it. Like nothing confusing here, I guess, because the main thing I want to show you in that video is how to use Docker Compose. So we already learned how to create Docker file and all sort of things. Alright, so let's save it and exit. Perfect. Now our Docker files are ready to use in our Docker Compose YAML configuration file, and it's time to create this file. I will say nano Docker Compose .yaml, not hyphen, .yaml. Alright, and make sure you spell that right, because otherwise Docker Compose cannot find this file and spin up the containers, right? You can just also call it YAML or YML, doesn't matter, but make sure you spell the Docker Compose correctly as it is. Alright, and let's just open up. So as we did for the Docker files, I'm gonna type everything required in here in this Docker Compose file. Then I'm just gonna copy and paste it in the server. Alright, the first thing that I'm gonna specify is the version of the Docker Compose. So you can just type in 3, doesn't really matter. And the next thing is services. So we're just gonna define our services: front end, back end, and database. So you can name these services as you wish, literally, doesn't really matter. So I'm just gonna call the first services as front end. You can just call it React app, UI, MERN, UI, or whatever you wish, really doesn't matter. The first thing we need to specify is the image, like, because all the thing Docker Compose is doing is creating and running container simultaneously. So we need to specify the which image that the Docker Compose will be using, right? But currently we don't have any image for this front end, right? But we have a Docker file instead, and that's why we're just going to use the build command in order to define the path where this Docker file for the front end service exists. So the basically path is front end. It exists in the front end, right? And I'm just gonna make the port mapping, and it's going to be 3000 to 3000, all right? And it is also going to be something like this: standing true or something, standing open true, something like that. And the other thing is TTY, and it's also going to be true. Like, honestly, I really don't know what these two things are, but let's leave that as it is, right? So the other thing is depends on. So I'm just gonna specify the service name that the front end will be depends on. So I will specify backend, which I will just create right now, okay? And yeah, pretty much it. So now let's create our backend service, which, by the way, you just need to really pay attention that all your services is in the same vertical line, right? This is important. Like, spaces in YAML files are super important. You gotta just really pay attention to it. Otherwise, you will get 100 of errors, all right? So in the backend, I will again just say build, because we don't have any image to pull from Docker app. So we need to specify the path, just like we did above. Backend, perfect. All right, the next thing is port mapping. So we will specify the ports, which is 5000 to 5000, all right? And the other thing is depends on. And this API, this backend service, will be depends on the database service, not service, okay? And that's pretty much it. Let's create a database service as well. And now we're not gonna build any Docker file. We're gonna be using Mongo image, which is already exists in Docker app. So I'm just gonna basically use the image commands, which is used for pulling images from Docker app. I'm just gonna specify the image name, which is Mongo. So I also make the port mapping for this one. I'm just gonna use the default port for MongoDB database. All right, and it will have extra feature called volumes, and we're gonna use volumes to back up our data in the database in somewhere in the local directory outside of the container, in case the container shut down or removed or anything like that, like in order to persist the data. That's all, right? And I will basically specify the directory, which is home fati and mongo backup and data db. All right, so this folder mongo backup, I will just create it right now. Let's just go ahead and just do it here. So which, by the way, I think we have a timeout in the terminal, so let's just close it and connect to it again. Real quick, ssh root and connect, go to the user. All right, go to the here. In here, I'm just gonna create a new folder called Mongo Backup. All right, Mongo Backup. So I will specify this directory in here, and the colon and this DataDB. Basically, MongoDB will save all the required files for the data in this directory inside of the container where the MongoDB exists. And when we say that, it will basically copy all this data inside of this directory to this local directory. So even if the container shut down or removed or anything like that, we will have all the required data in here. Basically, that's all these volumes does here. Perfect. Now, that's pretty much it. And lastly, I'm just gonna create a network for these services. So I'm just gonna say networks, and I'm just gonna call it MERN network. All right, MERN network, and the driver for this one will be bridge. All right, and I'm just gonna use this MERN network for each services to put all of them in the same network. I'm just gonna say networks, and the network name will be this, and let's copy and paste it real quick in here and in here as well. Perfect. And now all the services will be running in the same isolated network. Okay, perfect. Now I think that's pretty much it. When we just execute this Docker compose YAML file, it will first pull the Mongo image. So why not frontend? We just specify the frontend as a first service because it depends on backend service, and this backend service, it depends on the database. So the first service will be executed, it is database, right? And we'll first pull the image Mongo, and we'll put this database into this network, and then we're just gonna go to this directory, get the Docker file. Like the Docker compose is just gonna do that, right? Get the Docker file, build image, and run the container on this port, and put it on this MERN network as well. And for the front end, it will just go to this directory, get the Docker file, and create the image, and run this image as a container on this port. And it will be depends on backend, yeah, and it will put it on the networks as well. And lastly, the last thing I forgot is container names. Like this is like super important. Like this is, I mean, really important, right? So we're just gonna use container name to connect each service together. So for the front end, after build, let's say container name, I'm just gonna name it like React UI, all right? And for the backend, the container name, not command, bro. Container name will be Node API, all right? And for the database, the container name will be MongoDB, all right? MongoDB. Like as I said, this is just a naming. You can just name it as you wish, but we will use the exact container names in our connection string. All right, so just make sure you name it, or just you use the exact name in your connection string as well. So that's pretty much everything. All right, and also you can just put restart thing here always. That not about connecting services, but it just basically say that if the backend crash, just always restart, okay? But that doesn't really important, just don't confuse with that. The important thing here is container name, right? We're just gonna use this database container name in the Node API to connect to the MongoDB database. And we're just gonna use this Node container name in the front end in order to connect to this API, all right? So this is all configuration file. Let's copy and go to the Docker compose YAML, delete that Y, and paste it here. Perfect. Now here we have, let's just save and exit. Perfect. Let's cat it out, and here we are, Docker compose configuration YAML file. Perfect. Now this file is ready, but as I said, we need to change the connection string according to this container name that was specified. All right, so let's just go to backend, and I'm just gonna edit this server.js where we connect to the database. And here, instead of using an environment variable, I'm just gonna say connect. I just deleted that by mistake. So here I'm just gonna say MongoDB / MongoDB. All right, and that's it. Like, this is the standard link to connect to MongoDB, right? This is basically say that, hey man, I'm just looking for a MongoDB database, and after the slashes, you will just basically specify that where this MongoDB database lives on, like basically the host IP address or the name, right? And like basically, guys, containers are a host, right? When you spin up containers, these are actually isolated hosts, and like think them as a servers, right? So you can connect them, you can install anything. Like, these are like basically computer, right? And that's why we will put the container name here in order to connect to this container where the MongoDB lives, right? When we spin up the containers using Docker Compose, right? And that's it. And after that, we can just say that which database we want to connect, and in this case it will be to-do app. Of course, there's no database like that, but in MongoDB, you know, if the database or collection doesn't exist that you're trying to access, it will just create it automatically for you. So that's the string for the connection to this container in this Docker Compose. So let's just save and exit, and let's just go to frontend and do the similar thing for that. And the connection string for the backend in the frontends in the package.json, right? So we'll basically connect this frontend to backend in order to interact with the API. And in here we have a thing called proxy. And like normally we've been using localhost port 5000, right? That's right, because previously we have Node and React in the same hosts, right? Running on the same host, our local host. But now this is not the case, right? Because we have React app in different container and Node API in different container. That means they're on different servers actually. So we need to specify the server name or the server IP address in here, right? And in this case, it is Node API, right? Because we specified the container name as it is in the Docker Compose services part. And the port will be 5000 because we expose it in the 5000, so there's nothing wrong with that. And we should be good to go with that. Perfect. Let's save and exit. Yeah, pretty much it. Let's go back to root of the project. Now, it's time to spin up our containers. And the command for that is docker, not docker compose up. And if you want to just run it in detached mode, just put -d, and I will just do it like that. So this command will basically looking for the Docker Compose YAML file in this exact, like in this current directory, and if it find the file, then it will just execute all the services one by one, right? According to their depends on stuff. Like for example, the MongoDB service will start first because Node API depends on it, right? So let's just watch it together. So the first thing is database pulling. This is our server's name, okay? Database pulling. So we're just gonna pull the Mongo image from Docker Hub, all right? And then we're just gonna build the Node.js image, like not Node image. This is our API, right? Our source code. And then we're just gonna do the same thing for the React, and then our containers will be spin up. So let's just wait until it's completed. All right, it's done. Our container are running right now, right? So it just create a network, and like it just started this container, MongoDB, Node API, React UI, like in order, right? Perfect. It just download all the required stuff. It just create the image, then run the image as a container with the required, with all the configuration that was specified in the compose file. Like perfect. If I just say docker ps to see the running container, we'll see 3 containers are running right now. And the names like React UI, Node API, MongoDB, just we specified in our compose file. And the port mapping here, and yeah, pretty much everything. So let's get to the most important points of this lesson. Like these services are connected to each other. Let's see them together, because if they're not, like, we need to find a solution. So, but probably it should work. So let's just go to localhost, not localhost, this API IP address. So paste it in here, and I'm just gonna go to port 3000 where the React app is running. So let's just go hit enter, and we have to do app. All right. So let's wait until it's loaded. Okay, now it's running, like the front end part is running properly. But the question is, when we click this add button and add a new task, will it connect to the API? And the API will connect to the database. We'll see that together. So in that application, like all the tasks in the database will display it here automatically. And currently there's no task, there's no database, because we just created our database just right now. So let's see that together. I will just say homework and click save task. And here we go. It's working. Frontend connect to the API, and API just make this CRUD operation, the post CRUD operation to our MongoDB database, which is in another separate container. And then at a time, we just pull the data from the database and display it here. Perfect. Let's add in a new one, shop, and here it is. Even I refresh the page, it's here. Perfect. It's just working properly. Perfect. Like the point here is, like as I said, guys, you need to use these container names in order to connect them each other, right? We connect React to Node API, and we use this Node API container name in the proxy connection, and we use this MongoDB container name inside of the Node API MongoDB connection string. All right, and that's all the magic, right? And these 3 container running just like a computer, just like a server, right? Perfect. And let's take a look at the Mongo backup here, not here, ls, here, the Mongo backup, right? We just created like a few minutes ago while we're just doing the volumes things, and that was empty, right? And now we just run the container, spin up the container, and if I just ls it, we will have, like, we will see a lot of weird files, and basically these files enables MongoDB to persist data, or I mean basically these files, I mean, as I understand, the required files for the data, right? And MongoDB store these files in the container where the MongoDB lives as well, but we also copy this data, backup this data to this local directory as well. So let's go to projects, to do app again, and let's say docker pc, and I'm just gonna want to enter the MongoDB container. So I'm just gonna exec it MongoDB container, and I'm just gonna enter the bash, which, by the way, we're just done with it, right? Everything is working properly. The thing that I'm trying to do is showing you how things work under the hood. All right, so let's just get into this bash, the container where the MongoDB exists. So if I just say mongo sh, I will be entering to mongo shell. Perfect. And this basically shows us that MongoDB installed and running properly inside of this container. So if I just say show DBs, we have the to-do app. If I say use to-do app, and then I will say db tasks, and find. And we have homework here, right? And also the shop as well, shop and homework, right? And this data is pulling here and displaying here, like perfect. So let's just get out from this container, and if I just say docker compose down, it will basically stop all the container which spinned up by the docker compose and remove these containers as well. It will also tell you already like stopping and removed, right? So if I say docker pc, there's nothing. So I refresh the page and it's gone. So if we didn't specify the volumes, when I say docker compose up d, it will spin up again. But if we didn't specify the volumes, all the datas will be gone and we're not going to be able to access any of them, right? So but if I execute this command right now, we will have all the datas previously exist in the database back, because we back up this data in this local directory, right? And when we execute this docker compose, like docker compose will take a look at the volumes, which is here. Let me show you real quick. In here, it will just take a look at this directory real quick, and it will get all the files exist in this directory to this directory inside of the container, right? So basically the database will start using this data stored in this backup folder, right? Basically that's the whole thing, right? And let's just spin it up again, up in the detach mode, so it will create it and starting the container again. So if I just refresh the page, of course it may take some time because we're just like, think it as it is, like we're just restarting a computer. It will take time, right? Yes, the same thing applies for the containers as well. Yes, refresh the page. All right, it's just rounding here. Let's just wait just a little bit. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now we should see the exact data that we previously inserted to the database, which is homework and shopping, right? Because docker compose will pull everything from the local volumes and put it on the container, and here we are, right? Perfect. But that's it, guys. That's all I got for this video, for this tutorial. Let's summarize what we learned. We learned how to create Docker file to create the image for our application. Then we create a Docker compose YAML configuration file to specify all the required configuration stuff in that file, right? We can say, docker run name, like name it as it is, and then ports and the port things in the detach mode and all sort of things. But instead of doing all these things, we put them all in a sort of file, in a YAML file, which is a configuration file. And when we say docker compose up, basically docker compose spin it up all the container for us according to this file that we created, the docker compose file. And that's pretty much it. And we specify the container name inside of the docker compose YAML file, and we use this particular container name to connect the services all together, right? But yeah, that's pretty much all thing. I think that was awesome tutorial for you guys, and yeah, I'll catch you guys next time. Bye bye.